This is Mae Brussell. It's about 1 minute before World Watchers, but we're trying to figure the board here. I think we got your private conversation on that tape. What was that tape, Joe, huh? After the music, Joe Kavanaugh offered a home-cooked dinner to two people who won a questionnaire, 2 questions on the last program. What are you going to cook, Joe?
Spaghetti, I think.
Spaghetti. Okay, that's pretty good. Home cooked or canned?
Oh, home cooked.
I'm teasing you. I thought maybe it was going to be peanut butter on celery. Okay, now we got top of the hour, right? Then we'll get into World Watchers. And this is Mae Brussell, and the station is KAZU-FM in Pacific Grove, California. And the title of this program, as I said, is World Watchers. Its broadcast number is 736, and it's January the 13th, 1986. Last year at this time, I was asking you out there, the listeners, for some suggestions. I was sort of in a state of transition about what I would do with myself at the beginning of the year, whether I would continue the year of broadcast or whether I would write. I really want to do some writing, more articles. I haven't done a lot of writing, and write some books, and that's impossible at keeping up the quality of the research for World Watchers. And this year, the same question came into my mind, and I came up with a compromise. As of June the 30th, I will have been on the air for 15 years, every single week, except one evening when the tower went down. And I decided that I would continue this program until June the 30th of this year. That's at the end of June, and then begin the process of writing articles and newsletters, putting the material down in a written form so that you can have access to the weekly news that is coming out, get into some kind of a format of a newsletter, and work on books. I have the outline of several books ready to go, and I really am anxious to do those. Somebody has offered me an IBM computer. I'm getting a computer, and there are other researchers around the country, very fine people, who are using computers. And I think it's time for me to put my material onto the computer so that more people can share it. Those people that are writing and working on important material, I see it in newspapers around the country, people that I'm talking to who are investigative reporters and personal researchers, and I want to share this information with them. I have a home full of material, very valuable, that should begin to be put into the computers and available to more people than those people just listening on this station and to the stations that have World Watchers on it. So we will continue. If you subscribe to the broadcast and send checks for tapes or tape it off the air, you better listen carefully every single hour, because as of June the 30th, I'm going to change the format. So we'll continue with this until that time. I mentioned last week that Dick Goffin, the folk singer from Scotland, was going to be up in Santa Cruz a week from this Wednesday on the 22nd. He is quite radical and very interesting, a folk singer from Scotland, and a friend called me and wanted to make reservations to go up there, and we'd all hear him a week from Wednesday, and he heard that the entire American tour had been canceled, which was a shock to me. I'm not surprised at anything, but Dick Goffin will not be in Santa Cruz a week from Wednesday. Oh, just closing the door here over the next room. But the doorknob's off. So now we'll continue with the program. So we will not all meet. A lot of us, I plan to go up there. We will not be up in Santa Cruz, and Dick Goffin will not be in the United States. There's an article in the San Francisco Chronicle, a reprint of yesterday's story in the LA Times by Robert Scheer. It's titled, "Laser Weapons Can Burn Cities. 2 studies warn." And this has to do with reports that have come out on the fact that the Strategic Defense Initiative, the Star War proposal, not only is to protect the United States against Soviet missiles that are coming into the United States, but it could be an offensive weapon to cause massive firestorms throughout the world and cause tremendous damage to the air by burning every city in Soviet Union, for example, one city after the other, one moment after the other, until they're all destroyed. The attack would be an Armageddon, but it would not be a nuclear weapon. And it is similar to the Strategic Defense Initiative First Strike offensive that leaked out last year with the laser weapons attacking specific parts of the world. And it is identical to the intent that the rocket scientists came here to the United States in the first place when the war was over, if it really was over, World War II, or the format it had when it ceased in 1945. I've always mentioned the book Project Paperclip, and I cited it on the anniversary of the murder of John Kennedy on November 22nd. And there's one section of the book of Project Paperclip that always interested me, always, and it was the part about bringing in the scientists who would construct an outer station, and they were brought here from Germany, useful for launching spaceships into the atmosphere. They would construct a large reflector for focusing the sun rays onto the Earth, and they had another objective, a terrible thing, a weapon that would enable the first person to strike to rule the world. The focusing of this reflector on any living person would kill them immediately. Ocean waters could turn to steam, and forest fires instantly kindled. And I believe that that fire down at Big Sur 7 or 8 years ago, was an experimentation in this kind of kindling. And last year, setting fire, last year when there were these huge fires in Florida and in the southeast part of the United States, I was very suspicious of the circumstances and believed that the government was testing those lasers at that time. In 1971, this book came out, Project Paperclip, and it tells how impressed the Americans were by the Germans being able to conceive of something that they could rule the world and scorch the earth, that we brought these scientists, hundreds of them, over 600 of them, to the United States. And Paperclip has been one of the most dangerous operations of the entire history of the world, where the American technology and the mindset would bring people over here who wanted to rule the world before and almost won that battle, and let them start over here in the United States. Now, if that sounds outrageous or far-fetched, remember that J. Peter Grace, who has somewhat of a cabinet position under President Reagan, under watching the budget and the cost control, brought Otto Ambros to this country through Project Paperclip. And Ambros was Hitler's scientist for IG Farben, who created Zyklon B for mass exterminations and genocide. And he made the poison gases for IG Farben. And Jack Anderson has exposed their buildings or building places in Miami that are making massive crematoriums to send to Argentina, similar to the ones that were used at Auschwitz. So this just came out, this report of the plans for First Strike to set these fires just came out this past weekend. The Paperclip scientists, when they were brought to this country, were asked to rationalize about their membership in the Nazi Party, and some of them made it very clear. They said that their only desire was to prevent communism from spreading in Germany and to bring an end to economic and political chaos. Now, chaos is what we're getting out of this created terrorism, and with the farmers losing many of their farms, worse than any period since the Depression, and banks collapsing, this country on the verge of a chaos that's very carefully concealed but yet out in the open every day, and factories being put overseas so that unemployment will become rampant here, and we'll export what we can't afford to buy because we're not selling enough to other countries. We could create the same chaos that Germany had, and we have the same people in this country here who now want and state their desire is to control the world, and they're working with those very scientists who had the idea of those lasers to scorch the earth going back a long, long time. Now, in terms of chaos, there was an article in the San Francisco Chronicle today that illustrates one more time the thing that I've been talking about, specifically agent provocateurs that are creating the tensions in the Middle East and in Rome and Vienna and in various cities, in Tripoli and Egypt, in Lebanon, as an excuse for eventual fascism to bring order out of chaos. The story in the Chronicle today is titled, "Italy Blames Mobsters for Train Bombs." And in Florence, Italy, they just arrested 7 members of the mafia, the right-wing organized crime drug dealers who worked with 5 other suspects, including a fascist member of the Italian parliament, who were responsible for the blast in a tunnel in December of 1984, where 15 people were killed and 230 were injured. I've talked frequently about the Bologna bombing that was a destabilization in Europe, August the 2nd, 1980, that killed 85 people and 230 were seriously damaged. But the important thing is that they are now working faster, and it only took 1 year to figure out who was behind these massacres. And they've blamed members of the Camorra, the Italian mafia, out of Naples and in Italy, for carrying bombs, for attacking trains in tunnels, a train in particular. And the article says that these gangs work with stolen art. You've read recently how much art has been stolen out of the various museums and now out of Mexico, priceless collections, and they supply the hired killers throughout Europe. I believe that the bombings in Frankfurt, Germany, just recently that took place on the NATO bases, the bombings in Belgium, the one in Paris a few weeks ago, and in the Mideast the last 3 months, and the unrest throughout the entire area is provided by agent provocateurs. While Ronald Reagan lashes at Gaddafi, the experts say they were trained in Syria. When he talks about the Shiites and the violence of the various Muslim groups in Lebanon, they finger the groups in Cairo, and not in any single one of these instances can they come up with who really is behind it. Some say it's Abu Nidal, and the other experts say he's dead, he's died of cancer, and they can't finger who, but they're lashing out and creating violence that has no cause and has no reason, which is done for the identical reason that the mafia and the Camorra kill for the right wing in Italy and in Germany and Europe and even in the United States, in the hopes that order will come out of fascism. But first they have to create the chaos. Jean Kirkpatrick had a story in the newspaper. She has a syndicated column now. It's titled, "Terrorist Attacks Teach Us Tough Truths About the World." Now, Jean Kirkpatrick is part of this disinformation scene that has been going on in Washington for a long time. She's a big mouth freak who is the United States representative at the United Nations. She believes that the right wing can do no wrong. It always is the left. And Jean Kirkpatrick is, in this article, is blaming Libya and Arafat for a lot of the terrorism, where she doesn't look at the teams that she's trained and worked with. She's just the right-hand lady 1 hour away from Adolf Hitler's Reichstag gang. And she's part of Operation Chaos in the United States and works with Arnaud de Borchgrave of disinformation, who works with Reverend Moon and worked for the CIA. And Kirkpatrick has buddies such as Michael Ledeen and Claire Sterling, whose close contacts are to Waffen-SS Licio Gelli and Francesco Pazienza and the P2 Masonic Lodge that wants fascism in Europe. She is a woman who talks about these terrible terrorists. She responds to the act. The provocateur sets it up. Then she and the experts from the Georgetown Center of Strategic Studies follow with all their expertise on articles and generalities. You could fill a 2-ton truck with generalities on terrorism. But when it comes to the push and shove, and when they've identified people, they are from the right wing and they are from the mafia, and they're creating the terrorism so these people can write about it and provoke the far right kind of government that the Paperclip scientists said and other people said they pleaded for fascism, for the Hitler political party to bring chaos to a halt and have order. That Nazi Germany, with a subsequent 80 million people murdered or displaced, is their definition of order. That's why they liked Hitler and Mussolini, and it's a complete role reversal where all they brought was pain and chaos. Now, last week I was talking about Reverend Moon and his organization CAUSA, and how Fritz Kraemer, the man I've mentioned on the air for so many years, the mentor of Henry Kissinger, works for and is on the board of CAUSA. That's a Moon organization, a front organization. And I want you to listen very closely to what I'm going to share with you this evening. Sometimes I go a mile a minute because I bring in a lot to share, and I have enough to do 3 or 4 hours. But I'm going to talk about the importance of Fritz Kraemer working for Reverend Moon and the linkage of Reverend Moon and WACL, his second in command, to those very German Nazis that were part of Project Paperclip, that were brought to this country, that were part of the mentality of Germany. Henry Kissinger from Germany, Fritz Kraemer from Germany, and Kraemer working for Moon at this time. And I mentioned last week the International Security Council in London, and there was one gentleman who was a co-worker, Liechtenstein, who was a co-partner, deputy under Jean Kirkpatrick of the United Nations, and that CAUSA is one of the 20 or 30 front organizations of the Moon Church, and Fritz Kraemer, the U.S. plans officer of the Pentagon, who shares offices with Daniel Graham of Star Wars. And all of this connects, and it's very important that you understand that Daniel Graham is pushing the Strategic Defense Initiative, which has now just been exposed by 2 studies as being a first strike to scorch the earth. You see, the argument about Strategic Defense Initiative is that it would protect us from atomic bombs. But now you can see better the view of what they intend to do, stating that they wish to control the world by using lasers that scorch the world, because then when the conquering armies come in, if there's any survivors, there won't be any radiation. There'll only be fires wherever you want them. You can burn everything to the ground. It's like having the neutron bomb without even the consequences of that, and set it off from the Star Wars, drop it on every city that you want, and control that territory, then move in with the troops. So Fritz Kraemer is a man from Germany, from Frankfurt, Germany, who lived in Italy with Mussolini under the war until he came to the United States under the boiling fascism of Mussolini up to 1939 when he came here. And I also mentioned last week that Reverend Moon's organization, CAUSA, the one that Fritz Kraemer is part of, trains in Taiwan and with Taiwan for Latin American dictatorships as part of the World Anti-Communist League, and they are heavily involved with John Singlaub, who is connected to all our major police departments by computers through Western Goals, and also to the Soldier of Fortune, the Survivalists, and the Nazi network that got their training from Gerald L.K. Smith and the early fascists in this country, who combined with military intelligence during the Korean War, during the World War II, and resurfaced as a body of political activists, the Klan, the Nazis, the Silver Shirts, Father Coughlin's group, Gerald L.K. Smith, all connect then to Charles Willoughby and Reverend Gale from the Philippines and from Germany. And these people are working all as part of what look like different areas, but have very direct connections that are in the news all the time. And I mentioned, again, Reverend Moon putting $72,000 into a publication chain in Uruguay, and another $72 million, and another $60 million into Uruguay in a different publishing company. And he has unlimited money. Moon works with the Nazis from World War II, with the Waffen-SS, with the death squads, with Colonel Meza in Bolivia, with Klaus Barbie, with Licio Gelli, so that this team are fascists going back money from Ryosha Sasakawa, the war criminal, from Mussolini, from Hitler, and from Nazi gold, which was salted away and is unlimited. So last week I was talking about the connections of all of these people, and this week I was reading an article which I outlined very carefully. It was brought to me by a listener to World Watchers, and it's ready. It's available for you now. You can buy it, and I want to cite the references to this particular article so that hopefully you people who listen to World Watchers hopefully could do something about this in terms of writing to any of your congressmen, as many as you have time for, public officials, the Attorney General, and so forth. The article that was brought to me by a listener who knows I'm interested in Moon, in CAUSA, in Fritz Kraemer, and WACL, and that group, he handed me the article from Mother Jones, dated January 1986. It's on the stands now by Carolyn Weaver, and it's called Unholy Alliance. And in this article, it isn't long, it's about 9 pages, it suggests that Reverend Moon is willing to throw away, cast out the entire United States Constitution because America has failed its obligations and Christianity has failed their obligations, but that Moon will work with the far right who got Ronald Reagan elected, and they'll affect the choices of the chief justices, of the news media, and of Congress, and assure that the separation of church and state no longer exists in this country. This is his goal. But the catch about this thing is that Reverend Moon is funded, among other ways, by the United States government. The CIA, that was formed by Reinhard Gehlen, Hitler's chief of intelligence, is funding a man to overthrow the United States government. And Hitler stated that he would take the United States after he took South America, and his agents, with direct connections to his Kriegsakademie, the military school in Berlin, are being funded and are allowed to stay in the United States with the intent of changing Congress and of changing the separation of church and state and of murdering everybody that doesn't go along with them. Now, the reason this article is important is that it is the first time that I have seen in print the fact that these people intend to kill every one of their opponents. I know they do, and I know they have in the past, but they intend to kill their opponents, and they're funded by our government, and they work with Edwin Meese of the Justice Department at the current time. Now, this article, I'll begin the parts that I outlined for you to let you see the implications of this, because a lot of people read these things and pass it off and put it down. I just wonder how many people who can really read this article would be outraged at what they're seeing. The article begins with, in the shadow of American politics, there is a bizarre marriage underway between Reverend Sun Myung Moon and the American political right. And the gentleman they're talking about who represents the right is Tim LeHAYE, capital L, little a, H-A-Y-E, capital H-A-Y-E. Not a household word, a name, although he's known among the right as an organizer, similar to Richard Vagary of the Young Americans for Freedom. Tim LeHAYE and Bo Hi-Pak and Reverend Moon are very, very close, and LeHAYE works with Pak, who represents Moon's interests in this country. In the shadow of American politics, there is this bizarre marriage, as I said before, underway. Reverend Moon, according to this story, has apparently unlimited means, and that is one of the interesting things that I've studied about Moon, and I'll be doing more for you on the weeks to come, is that there is no limit to his money tree. And because he works with cocaine kings and shakes the coca branches and the heroin traffic and the Southeast Asian mafia extortion and the Japanese mafia coming into this country, there is unlimited money, because with every season you parlay millions, and nobody at all is stopping Reverend Moon. They mention his unlimited money, and it goes side by side with what this author described as a well-developed taste for power. Last week I talked about his making gunpowder and ammunitions, uniforms for military around the world, war equipment, that he was in the narcotics traffic, and that he has his hand with Licio Gelli and these people into Nazi gold, this $40 or $50 million that was salted away, and there's more under the White Sands Proving Grounds in New Mexico, millions of dollars of the Nazi money that is in the hands of our NASA scientists on a military base in the United States to be tapped for their purposes where nobody else can get it. It was put away after World War II when General Patton was killed. The war was stalled so he could get the Nazi money out, and the Nazi money was put aside for the resurgence of the control of the world, and evidently it has dribbled into the hands of those very people who are using the laser first strike to scorch the cities and to control the world. Now, this article says that Reverend Tim LeHAYE is head of the largest network of Christian right leaders. Well, he's close to the Moonies and working with them, and he has people in his organization. It's called the ACTV, or the initials, the American Coalition for Traditional Values. People like Jerry Falwell, Jim Baker, Jimmy Swaggart, and he claims he registered 2 million votes for Ronald Reagan in 1984, that 1 out of every 5 votes for President Reagan went through the born-again Christians, and they rallied and got these people to vote. The article says Bohai Pak spent most of his life serving his master, Reverend Moon, and Moon's teachings, irregardless of the fact that the Knights of Malta, the Vatican, the Pope, the Christian right work with him and love him, his teaching is that Jesus Christ failed in his mission, and God is now throwing away Christianity. Well, there are a lot of sensible people that can say, not that Jesus Christ fell, but the people who use the words of Jesus never lived up to the things that Jesus said, and that Christianity has gone down a hole like the United States of America, the Constitution. Christianity is out, and all that is left is chaos or rebuilding of institutions, which doesn't look like it's going to happen. So Reverend Moon is going to fill the void by saying that Christianity had its chance and it's out. Now, Moon thinks he's the second Messiah, and this article tells how he boasts that he will conquer the world and subjugate the world. Now, the rocket scientists, the paperclip scientists who emerged this week, and it's verified that they can scorch all their enemy and would control the world, and that's why they were brought to this country, to control the world. Those Nazi scientists working with Americans want to control the world. Reverend Moon's goal is to subjugate and conquer the world. Reverend Moon has an organization called CAUSA, and one of the front parts of it is the International Security Council. Fritz Kraemer, the German mentor of German Henry Kissinger, is on the board of the International Security Council. And Reverend Moon and Bohai Pak, World Anti-Communist League, are parts of organizations that have the old Nazis, neo-Nazis, death squads for killing opponents, labor leaders, newspaper people, and opposition of any kind. So the question to be asked is the United States Army plans officer Fritz Kraemer, the mentor of Henry Kissinger, Adolf Hitler's Fritz Kraemer, and is the goal to rule the world any different than it was earlier? And Moon is part of it, working hand in glove with these people. Daniel Graham of Star Wars and the laser for scorching the earth shares offices with Fritz Kraemer, and Fritz Kraemer is over Alexander Haig and Henry Kissinger and Kissinger Associates, is a man who put them in this power of position. So he says that he wants to subjugate the world. Moon says that when he is the head of the World Organization, fornication will be a capital offense. Now, he sets up marriages. He fornicates a lot and has had a few wives and a lot of kids, but he sets up marriages of 1,000 people at a time and tells them they can't fornicate. Those marriages are looked at as legal. They're photographed at Madison Square Garden or in Korea or wherever they take place. The mate doesn't know the other person. They're assigned to them. If it's an American male, a Korean or Japanese or some other female is attached to him as a wife and thereby becomes an American citizen, whereby her parents come to America and become American citizens, and her brothers and family get priority over new people applying. Or if it's a girl, she marries a member of possibly the Japanese mafia, the Japanese military. And I want to do more on the Japanese military, and they're rising up in the next few weeks. Mr. Nakasone went to a Japanese shrine to say prayers for those dead that killed Americans during the war, and he's resurrecting their special place in history. And the Japanese military is rampant with fascism. And then Moon says, according to this article, a quote, "In the process of setting up and subjugating the world, many people will die. Anyone who goes against his movement has to die." Now, the reason this article is important is that 2 times this is stated, and I have never seen it in print. As I said before, if you don't go along with me, you are going to have to die. And one of the people going along with him is Fritz Kraemer, part of the Moon Organization. And when Ronald Reagan wanted to divide up and conquer Central America. He put Henry Kissinger in charge of that, of all Central American policy. And the co-worker with Henry Kissinger and a member of CAUSA and the Moon Organization they all work with says that people who don't go along with him will die. Reverend Moon spoke at one time. There was a speech quoted that was printed in Mother Jones this last month titled Moon Speaks. He says, "My dream is to organize a Christian political party like the Christian Democratic Party in France or the Christian Party in Germany. I want a Christian party that will have Protestants, Catholics, and all religious sects. That's what unification is, to include every person who isn't who is a Christian of some kind, and then transfer their loyalty from Christ to Moon, but nobody else. And of course, then all Jews would have to die." He says, "We have to purge the corrupted politicians out of the Congress. The communist power will be helpless before our power. The sons of God must rule the world, and the separation between religion and politics is what Satan likes the most. There must be no separation of church and state." Now, we'll take a 1 minute from this horror story, which is a real story, and I want to ask you if you want to buy a watt. The station has been trying to sell a watt. We were supposed to announce, and I will do it, that you can own one of 4,200 watts. Now, I'll get back to the second half of this broadcast. This is Mae Brussell, and I'm talking, in case you picked it up in the beginning, basically and almost entirely for the rest of the evening, an article in Mother Jones by Carolyn Weaver titled Unholy Alliance, the strange relationship between Reverend Moon and his Unification Church and the Christian right. And the reason she thinks it's an unholy alliance, of course, is what would the Christian right, who believe in Jesus, including the Vatican and including the Knights of Malta, go along with Reverend Moon or his partner in this whole operation, Mr. Bohai Pak? And what do they have in common? That they are pushing members of the Supreme Court who will be appointed when the other ones pass away. They're pushing the congressmen out of office who don't favor the war economy and the CAUSA, the organization down in Central America with the death squads. What do they have in common with this man from South Korea? Well, the one thing the man from South Korea has is he has unlimited money. He brought into this country from Japan approximately $48 million just at Henry Kissinger's foundation. $48 million. That was in the Los Angeles Times back in 1981 that the Japanese were giving to Henry Kissinger. And there are millions and millions of dollars going to what you might think are the crazies. But remember that Mein Kampf was written with the stated goals of what Adolf Hitler wanted, and no one took it seriously. So you can't pass this man off as crazy because he has the largest far-right newspaper in the entire world, right in Washington, D.C. The president reads his paper every morning. The president of the United States is photographed with Reverend Moon and the Moon Organization. When Richard Nixon was in trouble at the time of Watergate, who came to his aid but Reverend Moon? He was identified as accusing people who didn't like Nixon as being communists or not patriotic and had rallies for crook Nixon. So he has a lot of power, and people are indebted to him. And at the time of the investigation of the Koreagate scandal, that had to do with his bringing in money, again, Bohai Pak and Reverend Moon, to buy off our various members of Congress. And at the time, it was made to appear that the payoff was to buy rice from Korea and not from the farmers in California, that the congressman from the House of Representatives and the Senate, and there was Carl Albert and even Mr. Tip O'Neill was part of the Koreagate scandal. And they collect women to have prostitution with men and members of Congress and then to blackmail them, the old Hitler trick, and Lyndon Johnson used it and Richard Nixon used it to put people in politics that you own and control. And the horrendous thing is that this man as I say, is funded from the CIA and from South Korea and works hand in hand with Taiwan and the son of Chiang Kai-shek, the original Kuomintang that were in narcotics traffic, to hold on to their right-wing tendencies and their fascism. The guns were paid for by the drug traffic. But in this country, he has this tremendous linkage to those people that can change the electoral process forever from now on. Now, in Mother Jones, he says, besides Satan liking the separation between religion and politics, he said, upon my command to the Europeans and others throughout the world, they would come and live in the United States. They would obey me. Then what would happen? We would embrace the religious world in one arm and the political world in the other. And with this great ideology, if you are not confident to do this, you had better die. So in one article, there's two references to dying. And what does this mean? With Charles Willoughby, his name was Karl Wiedenbach, working with these people up till the time he died around 1975, and with Otto Skorzeny and Mr. Franco in Spain and the Italian Nazi fascists, the Licio Gelli, Waffen-SS, Gelli built the P2 line for them to go to South America. All these people have connected in 1984 and 1985 with the re-election of Reagan. All this subcurrent has been going on while he avoids press conferences and can't talk off the cuff and looks like he's inept and goes off to Bitburg, but he has this sweet face and you can't blame him for making a few errors. And all this latent fascism and teamwork is surfacing, the amount of money that's being spent and their connections and the effect on the electoral process. Now, this article goes on. Mr. Bohai Pak, part of the Moon Empire, is a generous supporter of conservative crusades. He contributed to Christian right leader, this Tim LeHAYE. And LeHAYE once wrote to Moon, and this is a copy of a letter. He says, Bohai, I am encouraged. The Secretary of Education, Mr. Bennett, and he's one hiring the born-again Christians for jobs. Don Reagan, he's the chief of staff of the White House, linked to the pizza heroin connections out of New York to Merrill Lynch. Ed Meese, the Attorney General. Pat Buchanan, he's the speechwriter for Reagan who wanted him to go to Bitburg and who wants all former Nazis in this country not to be sought or prosecuted or deported. He says these people, in effect, are working with us. He cites them as his co-workers that makes his spirits good. These are good signs. He said even the physical ailments of the three of our 76-year-old flaming liberal Supreme Court justices encourages Mr. LeHAYE to Mr. Pak, wait, we've got them hanging on a limb. They're old and they're dying, and we'll get the justice stack. Since when does Mr. Bohai Pak become, he evidently is an American citizen, and Moon is too, and I think their citizenship should be questioned. If they're Americans, they should be charged with treason, not because they want political justices, but because they are manipulating the separation of church and state and getting tax deductions as church people while they are specifically deciding who's on the courts and how to bind together church and state and how to kill the opponents. And I cited the example of the terrorism and the mafia, the Camorra, that work with the far right wing in Italy. The members of the fascist members of the parliament are those former members of the P2, the Masonic Lodge. And the mafia is used to wipe out and kill, cause chaos on the streets and kill primary witnesses when political assassinations take place and cover up what is going on. The Camorra in Italy and the mafia in the United States work with the top officials of the government and also are subverting the Constitution by funding these people, Moon and Park, and letting them state that they have to surpass Christianity because it failed, and you have to stop separating church and state, which was what Reagan and Meese are doing. And they're very open about judges and their beliefs on not only abortion, but the entire church and state. So he is elated, Mr. LeHAYE, Reverend LeHAYE, that the justices are old. And he's elated, he puts in his letter to Mr. Pak about his wife, Beverly LeHAYE. Now, she's head of an organization for conservative causes. she organized what is called the CWA, Concerned Women for America. And he writes in a letter that's in Mother Jones, Beverly was invited to the White House. She was introduced to over 300 conservative leaders and was extended thunderous applause. She's going to be given unique opportunities in the future because of the growth of her organization. The conservatives want her appointed as a delegate with Marcella Mies, that otherwise known as Ursula Mies, for the women's conference in June in Africa. Now I have to look up the list. I have the list of people who went and see if Beverly LeHAYE was on there. At that time, the name didn't mean anything, but she was in the White House being briefed and briefing these 300 conservatives that were going to go out and spread the word to change Congress to get the constituents to vote out the libs and put in the Christian right. And the Christian right is working with Moon and Pak, who say we are going to murder anybody who isn't part of the Christian right. Now, I have cited the Christian organization that was formed in the 50s, the Campus Crusade by William Bright from Texas, and his links to the Kennedy assassination with Clint Murchison and John Connally, the governor of Texas at the time Kennedy was killed, and Leon Jaworski, the man who was supposed to investigate Koreagate and didn't do it, and Gerald Ford, who became president when Crook Nixon was out. And he was on the Warren Commission. All of these people behind the covering up of the murder of John Kennedy, the actual covering up, if they weren't part of the murder, covering is also a crime. They have belonged for years to an organization that is raising $22 billion to turn the world Christian, and they had satellite conferences last week. This also includes the well-known Clement Stone, who works along with this team, a very, very wealthy man in the insurance business. So not only does the group from the Campus Crusade and the team in Dallas and in Chicago that links to the assassination of Kennedy, or in John Connally's case, he's part of Permindex. He connects to the Italian P2 assassination teams to kill heads of states, and he also connects to the Klan and the Nazis and the Aryan nations through the team that wanted the Dominica invasion. So that these people are closely linked with Reverend LeHAYE and with Reverend Moon and Bohai Pak, who state that non-Christians will be murdered. And first they'll start with the Christians, which is what this group wants. And then Moon says, you Christians have failed. And among his associates are Donald Reagan, of the Chief of Staff, Mr. Bennett, the Secretary of Education, and Mies, who should be guarding our liberties, who's part of the team. Your Attorney General now is part of the team, Pat Buchanan and many others. And this is the team working with Fritz Kraemer and Daniel Graham of Star Wars with their paperclip scientists to scorch the world, to control the world. The paperclip Nazis wanted to do that. Reverend Moon wants to do it, and their common denominators are people like Charles Willoughby and Ryosha Sasakawa from World War II with their German, Italian, fascist connections that are active today. We're not talking about the past 40 years ago being dead. That's very active today. Now, Mrs. LeHAYE wanted to go to Africa to the meeting, and he wrote in a letter that she wanted to go because she could not only become close, better acquainted with the Attorney General's wife, and I'm sure they'd have a lot in common, but she could also spy or learn what the radical left out of Moscow is planning for the women of the world in 1990s. So she goes to the White House and is briefed there and meets with over 300 conservatives and gets a thunderous applause, and then is ready to plan her attack against women in the world that the Soviet Union may have an idea would better their chances of survival and their family. Now, LeHAYE wrote to Bohai Pak of the Moon Organization, I will be going to the Holy Land with Jerry Falwell and speaking for his 3-day conference on prophecy, the biblical prophecy being that Libya has to be wiped out. The Bible wants it and says it, and then within 10 years, Israel has to be wiped out, that this is their time for their great cultural achievements and biblical prophecies that allow them to survive, and then they, too, have to be killed. So LeHAYE was going to the Holy Land with Falwell, and Jerry and George Bush, the vice president, travels with Pat Robinson and Falwell, and this group are all very close and work together. Now, LeHAYE wrote that in a letter that was reprinted in the magazine that he hoped that Pat Robertson wouldn't run for president, that Jerry Falwell would make a good president, and they were pushing for that. And then he wrote to Bohai Pak, I'm in your debt for your generous help to our work, and that his organization would be in Washington, and they would sit together at the first CBS shareholders meeting when Jesse Helms would finally take over the CBS News. Jesse Helms gave a dinner honoring Mr. D'Aubuisson, Roberto D'Aubuisson, responsible for many murders in El Salvador, who worked with the death squads in El Salvador and with the Contras in Nicaragua and with the military in Guatemala and the military also in El Salvador. Now, Guatemala just had their first elected president about a month ago, so they're very fragile, but they've always been a military base put in power by the United States, and these people work hand in glove with the death squads that make sure they last. Now, Beverly LeHAYE's role with her organization, CWA, is to stamp out any trace of feminism. I'm sure the women in the country should arise or be angry at the position of power that these people have, not only to be entertained in the White House, but to work with a person who wants to change the way we have a constitution, the separation of church and state, and to kill the opponents and have the expressed desire identical to Adolf Hitler's, identical to the Project Paperclip scientists. And here is Daniel Graham and Fritz Kraemer, close to Reverend Moon, whose stated goal is to kill opponents and rule the world. And our Pentagon, as well as our think tanks, go along with these people, attend their conferences, accept gifts from them, and while they state how they will subjugate the United States, bring people in here, take over the Congress, and take over the courts. Now, this article says there's a growing bond between Reverend Moon and many of the fundamentalists, and some of it is right in the open, like the Washington Times, the newspaper in Washington that Bohai Pak runs. They have no ads. They lose millions a year, but they have bought gratitude from every conservative organization. They push the Star Wars initiative. They push the military squads and the D'Aubuissons. They interview a half-page article every issue with people like Michael Ledeen and Jean Kirkpatrick and John Singlaub. They have photographs etched in your memory with some story about their latest exploitation and links to Nazis, death squads, the World Anti-Communist League. So on the open side, they have the newspaper in Washington with Arnaud de Borchgrave as the head of it. And then a lot of it, of course, this article says, is covert. Now, with all of this covert business, what in the heck are we allowing them to state their goals of what they're going to do? Because the covert is an open-ended, no end-to-money operation, and even our own government is bankrupt. Who can stop the steamrolling now, the pace with which these people are overt, how they connect, and what can you do about it? And this article says that most of the church work is done through what they call the Unification Church, but CAUSA does other things and gives side by side, and they cited the New Right leader, Terry Dolan, who received $500,000 from Reverend Moon. Well, it costs $1 million now, the running price, to run for a Senate seat, and Moon can give them $500,000 or $750,000 through these organizations and fronts, and then get the kind of legislature he wants going. He can write off his newspaper as a loss. He doesn't need the ads, and push these conservative writers and conservative liars and people who have told not true stories about the Korean airline, about the shooting of the Pope, about the shooting of Ronald Reagan. They don't write about the real John Hinckley, but it is a paper or a rag for propagandists. Now, CAUSA funds all kinds of news material. Many of you might have seen Reverend Moon's staging of a crash session for newspaper people around the world that he had in South Korea, and he paid $3,000 or $4,000 into each person and took a drove of American writers, 200 or 300, and they had food and slides and entertainment, and he has conferences for scientists. This one was on journalists. He has the clergy. He has academic groups and political leaders of all kinds of issues, as long as they are Christian right. And in Latin America, he's trying to take over Latin America. And Mother Jones wrote this, and at the time this was written, just before it went to press, they weren't aware of the links of Reverend Moon to Licio Gelli in South America that came out just a week or two ago, and their attempt, the expose of overthrowing Brazil and Argentina to put the original Nazi goon squads into office, the ones that were just charged with deaths, would all be acquitted and out of jail, and they wanted have a coup in Argentina before the sentencing, or they'll do it any way they can. And he controls Uruguay, the newspapers, the banking conditions, and from Uruguay, and with a quick trip down to Dallas, Texas, Moon is wanting to put a tight dictatorship into those frail democracies in Brazil and Argentina, working with people from the Waffen SS who know how to get rid of democracies and labor leaders and reporters and put in the fascist government. Now, this article continues, the money, he repeats, seems to be no object. Whoever writes about Moon, they'll say in 2 or 3 spaces or in one column, literally asking, where is the money coming from? But nobody as yet, except a few authors, and there's a good book out that came last year called Nazi Gold. A few good authors have linked these people and World Anti-Communist League to that tons of gold and diamonds that were salted away after World War II that have now increased in value. If they were worth 40 million then, they may be worth 80 or 90 million now. And they're transferring it through the Swiss banks, through banks in this country, but mostly the Swiss or Panama or the Cayman Islands. And that money is going for the operation of fascism. And there's no amount of liberals or peaceniks or the green people that are ever going to stop this steamroller unless they latch at the very highest level of Moon, LeHAYE Pak, Fritz Kraemer. What are they doing? What is their accounting? If they're a tax-deductible church, they should account for every cent they have, and yet their money is all over the world, like the Bhagwan Rajneesh, who came to this country, who has 30 or 40 million in Germany, in Swiss banks, all over the world. And it's hard to tap the money because drug money brings more money, and nobody's giving up narcotics, and it's its own generating force that won't give up. Now, this article says between 1975 and 1984, and this is from the time of Nixon's Watergate when he was eased out, up to the re-election of Ronald Reagan, Reverend Moon brought $800 million into the United States from Japan alone. As I say, he works with Ryoshi Sasakawa, Japanese organized crime, Japanese criminals, Japanese fascists, and drug money, gambling money, extortion, prostitution. He brought in that they have a record of $800 million in the United States. Now, who else has that kind of money? Even the Rockefellers, who are supposed to be controlling the world, who are supposed to have so much money, have no hanky-panky like that. They have the Chase Manhattan Bank, and they have their Chevron Oil and Exxon. But even they have to have accountants to account for something, and Reverend Moon can bring in $800 million. And the worst part is that $600 million could be CIA money that goes to Japan through Richard Allen, the former National Security Advisor, who is a lobbyist for Japan. It can come from our country, from the banks that have collapsed, from the, in quotes, the loans that we gave that nobody had collateral for. The Bank of America can give a $40 million loan to Bolivia. They can't pay it back. The bank is out the money at this end. Bolivia doesn't have it there. They could transfer it to Japan, and Japan brings it in by Moon to subjugate us. That money comes in to buy newspapers, to take over the Congress, to put in money in 50 states for every elected official. At the time of Watergate, Senator Wright Patman wanted to investigate the money tree of where the money was coming in, that was in Bernard Barker's pockets and Martinez's pockets, and with H.L. Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy and James McCord. And Patman's banking team was closed up because he was on the right track of the money tree and was put in the hands of Leon Jaworski, a co-worker with Reverend Moon and LeHAYE Pak and the Warren Commission. It was put into his hands so that they wouldn't find the money tree. And when I wrote an article on Martha Mitchell being kidnapped and about the CIA and Watergate in 1972, I expressed the idea, how do you separate CIA money from money that goes overseas and then comes back in their pockets to wiretap every Democratic congressman and at the Democratic National Convention and fix them up with whores and break into their office and files and tap the telephone. All those people were involved were from the CIA, and the money goes from Washington to South America and Central America and back to Miami and then into the pockets of the men at the hotel. So America is robbing itself, and America is wiretapping, and America sends money overseas. And in comes Reverend Moon with these links to Taiwan and South Korea and Japan, the crime syndicate, the drug dealers, and puts a hunk of $800 million into this country, unaccountable for what he is doing. The article concludes by saying the full story behind Moon's wealth, again, third time this Carolyn Weaver says, is unknown. A lot of it comes from religious icons in Japan. He literally has the free run of all Japan and all South Korea. Moon has a worldwide network of holdings that includes weapons companies, and I mentioned some of those last week, titanium firm, a string of newspapers in Uruguay and in Cyprus and in Japan. He owns a hunk of those papers. Well, again, it was in Cyprus where the first confrontation came in the Mideast that caused and escalated the spiral of the 3 Israelis that were killed by 2 PLO and 1 man from London. Well, Moon has organizations in London and the CIA, and one of the men was not a Palestinian wanting vengeance against Israel. He was a British citizen from London who killed 3 Jews at Cyprus, and then the organized, in quotes, terrorists get even by hijacking a ship and killing Mr. Klinghoffer. Then Israeli Mossad gets angry and bombs over in Libya, and then allegedly the Libyans, with no proof, there are bombs in Rome and in Vienna, and then the president of the United States is ready for World War III on the basis of no facts, no proof, no gunmen, no incidences, and among other places that Moon owns the news media and investments like hotels and minerals and religious icons. He has hangout and a big hunk of Cyprus, which is the area that just escalated this last scene. Now, his contacts, he says that he wants to take over the United States by first taking over the FBI. This was a speech he gave in 1970, 15 years ago. Then the CIA, then the military forces, then then the business community, and then the local police departments. And he says that these contacts are a means of entering into the political arena to influence foreign policy and ultimately of establishing absolute dominion over the American people. Now, if that can't be more clearly spelled out, I don't know what is. And stating that in 1970, how in the heck does he get into this country with the tentacles that he has, with the congressman he has, with the bribes and the money and the links to CAUSA and our policies in Central and South America or Middle East? Where does Moon fit into the American picture and Bohai Pak as an American citizen? If they come from another country, they should be deported. If they're Americans, they should be charged with treason, because they not only have the intent, they not only have the means, but they're proving that they're doing the acts, that they are working with death squads, that there are no trials by jury, that there are kidnappings and bombings of native populations. And Moon stated quite clearly the use of the United States electoral process by which he would gain control of the U.S. government. I have said for many years that this is a country that was invaded, taken over. It began with our marriage of Reinhard Gehlen, Hitler's chief of intelligence, into the United States. And since then, all the moves against the United States have gone on very quietly. And the latest, of course, I mentioned last week with Fritz Kraemer being part of the Moon organization with the International Security Council. Now, just finally, in 1 second, this Tim LeHAYE had a conference just this last year at the hotel in Washington, D.C. for his group at the Shoreham Hotel, and people like Jack Kemp, a presidential candidate, was there, Jesse Helms, Paul Weyrich of the right, Newt Gingrich, Jerry Falwell, a possible presidential contender, and then his main speaker was Bohai Pak of South Korea, meeting with people like Jack Kemp, who are not only conservative, there's nothing wrong with being conservative, but they're entertaining these people and trading votes and getting votes so that the elected officials will be beholden to Moon and his unlimited millions, and Moon has spelled out exactly what he wants for this country. Well, this is a serious thing that's been going on for a long, long time, but this is the first time I've seen him print the plans for genocide in the United States and around the world. And with that happy thought, or unhappy thought, whichever way you see it, for some it's good and others it's bad, I will leave you. It's the top of the hour, and this is Mae Brussell, and I'll be back with you next week. It's KAZU FM in Pacific Grove, California.